Hey, guess what? A teacher that actually wants to talk about education funding. Let's talk to him.
The New England take.
All right, excited today to be joined by Kristen Cheetham. He is a retired Air Force intelligence officer and is after 30 years, crazy guy decided to go teach high school at Alvirne High School in Hudson. He's a New Boston resident. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks, AJ. I'm glad to be here.
All right, so I had posted in response to John Leslie on X, who's a great follow if you care about kind of conservative libertarian sort of politics. He posts all sorts of stuff on there, and he posted an article of the NEA president Megan Tuttle talking about education funding and that they need more because we always need more funding for education regardless of wherever it goes. No one really knows. That's the point of this ongoing series I'm doing right here on the cost of education. And I put in there my last episode in this series where I spoke with the Superintendent Association, and you had all sorts of stuff on it. But to start off with, at the big picture, what's your take on, like, right now we're seeing astronomical spending per student per pupil. It seems to me at this point a majority of it honestly going to special education, individualized education plans, not necessarily the things we're talking about. It's not necessarily the teachers or the building or things like that, and it's kind of getting defrayed into all sorts of programs that no one's able to keep track of.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, the funding part is one of the more difficult things to understand when you get to a school district. I mean, my background in the military, they earmark a lot of money, right? And so there's not a lot of movement of money in budgets in the Department of Defense. I mean, if they've earmarked money for example, tech, if they need new computer systems and things like that, you can't just move that money to something else. You can't say, well, I want to go buy fuel for airplanes with that. There's a lot more, I think, fluidity in education budgets from what I've seen. Things get moved around a little bit, and that's an interesting aspect of this. I think it leads to a little bit less accountability. I do agree with you that there are some parts of education, when you're talking about special ed and those programs that are like mandated, those have to be funded. Those do take up a lot of the cost. I thought what was interesting in that was just listening to the talk about teacher salaries versus administrative salaries. That made me smile, and that's kind of where I said I got to respond to this.
Yeah. That was like the one question. Like, okay, I'm basically doing this entire interview to ask you this one question. Where my mom and sister are ed techs at a public school in Maine. They make a sixth maybe of what the school superintendent does, and something I wish I should have hammered home a little bit more on them honestly is this is public service. Like, my day job, I work for the state of New Hampshire. I don't expect to be making private industry PR communications money where I'm pulling in an ungodly amount of money or something. I'm not saying I necessarily could be hired those just based on my own abilities. I hope I could, but you go into public service assuming you're going to be taking a loss in salary in order to provide something to my community and things like that. And their whole approach to it was it was the most commercial argument I've ever heard in my life. Like, I would have expected to hear that from Amazon.
Right. Well, it's interesting because, as a military guy, I did that, right? I mean, military guys know you're going to go in, you're not going to get paid as much as your peers. I think that's something that we understand because the mission's great, right? And I actually think, in my experience, teachers totally understand that. I don't think teachers nobody's going to college and saying, I want to become a teacher and saying, I'm going to be rich. Nobody does that. They want to do it because they're passionate about it. I think when you talk about like just administration wise, the people that go into it and how they get into it. And I'm not, my enemies are systems. I've said that to you, I think before, and my enemies are not individuals. So I'm not talking about any specific individuals. I'm just talking about what I've noticed across the state and talking with teachers and educators is that it seems most often people who don't like teaching say, I've got to get out of teaching and become an administrator. That's just such an odd way to pick your leaders, in my opinion. It's not always true. So again, I'm painting with a broad brush. I want to make sure I do say that. But so you get people who don't really like teaching, who get into administration, and then their motives sort of change. I think the motivation of what's going on is really the part that is the most intriguing to me, like how they view education. And I kind of feel like my general impression of public education after doing it for 10 years is it's completely incoherent. And what I mean by that is they're disconnected now from the mission, and they're more connected to the fighting over subjects but the mission is educating students. And so that's where the disconnect comes. And I think that the most disconnected group is the administrators at schools and at superintendent levels, definitely.
I mean, as a teacher, I understand the concept of the superintendent being the CEO. You got multiple buildings. Let's
Right.
just take the bigger school districts. Let's just start
Right.
with that, because it's a totally different can of worms. And I even pushed back on the superintendents a little bit when it came to the smaller rural towns that have their own superintendent for some reason. Like Concord,
Right.
you got 4 or 5 elementary schools. You got a very large middle school and a very large high school. Like, there's a lot of CEO level things of administrating all that and being on call 24/7. Yeah, definitely. You're at the mercy of a lot of cranky school board and public and the
Yeah.
news agencies and everything like that. But when it comes down to the line, when you're a teacher, how much are you really honestly interacting with the superintendent, aside from it being that person over there to make sure I get paid, I guess?
Right. Well, I think, I don't want to interact with the superintendent. I don't mean that I have a bad superintendent in my school district. That's not what it is. It's just that I want the superintendent focusing on superintendent stuff and not teacher stuff. And so one of the things I've noticed just from a leadership aspect of, like, I think mistaken manpower usage is that I don't think superintendents should be dragged down into teacher level discussions. I was kind of shocked that they're like, we got to be on the phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's not how leaders do it in my background. My background is, yeah, you got to be available 24/7 when you're on the clock. But you can take a vacation. You certainly aren't going to have to answer phones. You have a deputy commander. When I was an intelligence commander, I had a deputy commander who could handle things. They don't organize correctly. And I think it's because of the way they choose their leaders. Again, it goes to who's willing to go get your certificates, who's willing to go get your advanced to studies. It's not the best necessarily, like, hey, let's pick the best teachers and the best people who understand these personnel systems so that they can be in charge. And so they make really weird decisions where they're on the phone. Why are they available to people 24 hours a day? No one, I don't think anyone's expecting that. I think they're expecting answers, maybe if there's an emergency, but they're not expecting that it's going to always be that superintendent. So that's just such an odd way of managing things. And I think it goes to the crux of my, like, concern over that last interview you showed, which was, I feel like we've got some superintendents who don't really have basic leadership ability. If they're saying, I have to answer every phone call, that's not how you do it. That's why you have a staff. And certainly an assistant superintendent should be able to run a school district while you're on vacation. And if that's not happening, so I think using that as an example of why I need to get paid so much was a really poor example, because I'm just like, well, you're just mismanaging your job. I do think, when they talk about responsibilities in some of the larger school districts, sure, they have a lot of schools to be responsible for. But I actually think, this is probably the free market person in me. I think it's much better to be paid on what you've accomplished than your responsibilities. In fact, I don't think anybody should be paid on their responsibilities. I think it all has to be paid out on your accomplishments. And so I think we can all agree, and I don't know anybody in education who would disagree with me. Over the last 10 years, things haven't gone well. In my 10 years of teaching, I've seen it go in the wrong direction. So there's not accountability built into the system for that.
So this has been really anecdotal for me, but I'm interested to get your take on it. It seems a lot of the louder people out there complaining about school funding from the people that are in the world of education are the ones that have, you mentioned it briefly before, is the credential over what they're actually doing per se. Like, oh, I'm a high school teacher at such and such teaching science. I've got 2 master's degrees and all this stuff. I'm like,
Right.
so talk about a shitty investment.
Right.
Like you're spending $100,000 of education to go and make $70,000 a year, maybe if you're lucky. Like,
Right.
I don't understand this. Maybe it's kind of a trickle down from the world of higher education. My previous work was in higher education from my employment. It seems like a lot of that stuff has trickled down into the K through 12 system, where you don't need that level. You should be getting professional development and things of that nature, because things do change. But it seems overboard.
No, I totally agree with that. I think that there is a way over credentialed plan to get people into leadership. Typically, like when I've met a lot of great teachers, being the New Hampshire Teacher of the Year, I got to meet all the other teachers of the year from 50 states. And I'll tell you, these are the greatest people you'd ever want to meet. You'd like them all, and they work hard and they're really dedicated. And these are the ones that are doing all the right things in the classroom, and they don't have time to be like, okay, I got to get out of here to go work on my PhD or my certificate of advanced graduate studies or all these other things because they're busy doing their job. And so those who have who prioritize those things, again, I just don't think that they're coming from the best locations. Generally speaking, again, it's a bell curve. So there are outliers on either end. But in general, I think incentivizing the credential is going to get people who are going to chase the credential rather than chasing great classroom experiences to prove that they should be in charge of something. That's my general impression of that. And so I hate watching that happen because I think credentialism is really dangerous for leadership jobs in general.
So as a teacher, how do you feel on the ground with regards to how you're getting funded for your ability to do your job, having the resources you need, getting paid is obviously a component of that. But how does it feel to you personally?
So I'm a little bit a different individual because part of my salary is funded by the Department of Defense and the fact that I'm an ROTC teacher. But I will say, just from watching, one of the things I notice with the union itself is a lot of times they'll talk about salaries, right? And this is something that they'll come up with when it comes for contract time. And I actually don't think that that's what's making teachers stop teach. I don't think it has anything to do with making teachers stop teach. I can tell you in 98% of my conversations, the number one reason teachers are leaving teaching is because they are not happy teaching. And the reason they're not happy teaching is because we have terrible rules and regulations for student behavior. And student behavior has degraded so much in the school system that we now have teachers who say, I don't really care what you pay me. I'm not staying to do this. That's unusual. So you'll have a certain number of teachers who are the trapped teachers, where they're like, I'm too close to getting a pension to leave it at this point. But the non-trapped teachers are like, I'm not putting up with this anymore. And so that goes right back to like how our administrators and sort of superintendents are viewing the incentives of how they do their job. If I could just like go for a couple seconds here, I could kind of explain what I just mean by that. So when I look at education, here's how people are incentivized in the school I work in. Students are really easy to figure out. They want the best grade for the least amount of work, just like I did, just like you did, just like everybody does in everything we do. We want the most reward for the least amount of work. Then you'll have parents. And I think really parents in the education system right now are saying, if my kids are getting good grades, I'm happy. The last group is teachers, and teachers are like, we want you to get good grades. Certainly, I want you to succeed, but I'd rather you work hard to get it. So we're like different than those first two groups in the fact that we're incentivizing hard work, which is hard to do. And then you get to administrators. Administrators are incentivized by something totally different. Just kind of what you were talking about in the last conversation with the superintendents. The superintendents and the principals don't want to be called by parents. So they're very happy in a system where students get good grades. And that becomes incoherent because teachers want students to learn and everybody else sort of wants the students to just get good grades. That's, I think, the greatest disconnect. So when you look at what makes teachers unhappy, it's because, well, I can't hold kids to high standards because the principal wants me to pass them. We have grade inflation. Everything's out of control. And so if I was to list the reasons why teachers are unhappy, I don't think it's resources. I really don't. Now, I work in I work in Hudson School District, and I think we're resourced pretty well. It's not perfect. I mean, you'll see people say, I wish we had more. Of course, do you know anybody who works anywhere that doesn't want more money? Right. So, but I do think that that's lower on the list of things that are disgruntling teachers. And this is the part that never gets talked about because that requires problem solving. Arguing about salaries is not really problem solving. Problem solving means, how are we going to fix bad student behavior? How are we going to fix the fact that kids can't read when they're entering the high school? How are we going to, those are difficult problems and they don't want to talk about those. So I think there's a lot of people who love when teachers talk about salary because it's such an easy conversation to have.
Oh yeah, 100%. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not at a place yet where I'm willing to go through my kid has transferred to a charter school.
Right.
He out of the public school because of various things. And eventually I'll talk about it. I want to put more time between it and consideration and such because I do support schools. Like a lot of people assume because I'm a right wing libertarian type that supports EFAs and everything like that. That you just want to defund all the public schools so they go under. It's like no, I'm not. Like I think Jason Osborne and some of the other guys over at the State House, yeah, that's their ultimate mission. And
Right.
mask off. That's what you guys are doing. That's fine. That it's politics. It's politics, baby. Is what it comes down
Right.
to. I support the public schools. I think they're invaluable. But we're setting up teachers to really have this nightmare because they're dealing with the school boards and the superintendents being way too involved in what's going on. I'm curious on this specifically with you. I feel like there's no real consequences for these students. Like when it comes down to we want them to get through. Like the focus on we need to just get them through the school. Like unfortunately the reality of the situation is some kids should fail. Like they need
Right.
that failure. It could be a mechanism to figure out ways to improve. Maybe they do need that extra year of education. Staying back a grade, as difficult as that can be, and honestly embarrassing. It sucks. But like the current system doesn't seem to be fulfilling its needs, and we just keep saying, "Oh, we need to hire more school psychologists, and hire more therapists that can be in the school." When I haven't yet to see any evidence that those additions to the staff are doing anything. Maybe making life easier for people in the building because you're removing the troublesome student and putting them in other situations. But it's not a systemic fix.
Right. Well, I mean, that is probably like the number one frustration I have, what you've just described, which is just the lack of accountability in students. And it's not really the student. It's not the student's fault. Of course, they want the best grade for the least amount of work. I totally get that. But what I think there's been a lot of, education more than anything I've ever seen in my life is like driven by like these, what I would call like the gimmicks almost. They come up with these gimmicks and they put them in place for a few years and they don't work. And then they have a new gimmick right behind it. And we never really actually just say, well, can we just look at the problem? Can we just say, what is the problem we're trying to solve here? And so, I think competency-based education is a really interesting thing, right? It sounds beautiful. I think there are a lot of advocates for it. I've talked with them. They've explained it to me in a perfect setting. I've seen what it looks like in the real world, which is it's really just a way to find ways to pass kids who aren't going to be able to pass tests, in my opinion. And then, you see the same thing with grades being able to be, we just let kids remaking tests until they pass, and there's never a deadline, and credit recovery where it's like, well, you didn't get credit for your class because you've completely failed it, but now we're going to let you do some alternative assignment in the last 2 weeks of the school year, and maybe this is going to get you over the top to get your grade. And I just think, well, what are all these incentives? Where are these incentives coming from? It's not coming from teachers. I can tell you that 100%. It's one of the things I've noticed the most, because when I came into public education from the military, my biggest fear was, am I going to be working with a bunch of people who don't care about what they do? I mean, I don't know what I'm going to be experiencing. Teachers care deeply about teaching kids. The system is failing the teachers because it's saying, you got to pass them. We're going to find a way to pass them. It's got to be accommodated. Everything must be accommodated. Everyone has anxiety. Everyone has this. And these are all designed to like create an excuse, almost an excuse industry in the school that doesn't make kids ever be held accountable for just trying to get them to learn something. And so what you end up having is almost everybody is incentivized by the bottom line. Did my kid get an A or a B? That's perfect. We're good. And the administrator's like, perfect. Nobody's going to call me tonight. The kid got a B. But the teachers walk away scratching their heads saying, are these kids learning what I want them to learn? Or if we made everything so easy and made everything so accommodating that we're just all sort of playing a game. And I think that that's really tragic. I mean, in some ways, I mean, I hate to use like loaded terms because I try to like be very measured, but there's a little bit of fraud in what's going on in the schools. I got to be honest with you. The kids are walking out thinking Well, you probably saw the story of the student that finished high honors class and then sued the school district because she couldn't read down in Maryland. I think that was a big story about 3 months ago. I won't say I've seen anything that egregious, but I will tell you that grade inflation's real. Everyone's not students aren't learning as much as they used to. They just aren't.
I'm really curious to get your take on the JROTC part of it and the impact of leadership programs around education. I've even written an op-ed that was in the Union Leader a year ago when it comes to scouting, because Scouting America is a tremendous organization. I have problems with the national office, but when it comes down to it as a leadership program and training kids to really understand what real difficulty is in life and taking initiative and doing things is life changing, and it really changed the way I was as a person growing up as a kid. And now I'm so happy that my son's very much in the program. The JROTC program is very much the same. I mean, do you see more programs of that nature maybe having a positive impact?
Yeah, I think I work in the CT part of our building, so we have a lot of great programs. When I first was retiring from the Air Force and thinking about what I was going to do next, my wife was like, "You should go teach high school," and I was like, "Are you crazy?" And then I came up and I met the folks at Alvirne High School and I saw their CTE programs, and they're all such great experiential learning programs, but they're all sort of also on the same sheet of music when it comes to, hey, we want kids to learn like character development. We want them to be resilient. We want them to understand that it's important to be polite and it's important to be, kind to one another. And so those are I always say with ROTC, because everybody pictures us like, oh, you must do marching and do push-ups. And I'm like, no, we actually we want to teach the soft skills that you want in your boss and in your neighbor and in your best friend, the kind of people you can rely on, the kind of people who can work through problems, the kind of people who are willing to work hard. Those are all the things, the soft skills we want to teach. And then we do it in the structure of an Air Force program where they can learn about airplanes and they can learn about drones, and there's a lot of cool parts to it too. But I think those kind of leadership programs definitely have a major effect on students. And so getting back to what you were saying, where you have kids who are like, all these kids who are like, being identified as in a category or something, that just doesn't apply in my program. I mean, I get kids and they'll be like, oh, this kids get, anxiety. If they don't have anxiety by the time they're done with our program, it's not because I'm changing them. I'm just saying, you can do that. I think you can do that. What do you mean you can't? Of course you can do that. And I think that there's just not enough of that. And I think this again goes back to sort of I think at a certain level in the school system, they want to avoid problems, right? And so if you come in and you say, hey, my son's having difficulty reading, I think the appropriate response as a teacher would be for me to say to you, I need to work with your son on reading. Maybe I can get him to read more with me. Let's try to figure a way for me to get him to do more reading. And I find out what level he's at, and I say, well, let's do reading at that level and improve. Just like I would say, if I can't do push-ups, let's do some push-ups, right? And let's get better at it. I think a lot of times the system is set up. Let's accommodate the kid who can't read, and I don't like accommodating. I think accommodating is not the way to go, because what you're saying is, okay, you can't read, so let's give you an audiobook. Well, how are you ever going to learn to read? I'd rather say, hey, this kid can't read. Let's try and get him. Let's get him moving. Let's get him moving in the right direction. And I see that over and over again, where I think parents get frustrated, but they get placated by the accommodation, because the accommodation means my kid's not going to be stressing out at school anymore, and we can have dinner without having an argument. But it's a false solution, because your kid still can't read. And it makes me sad, because I think, obviously I am always horrified when people get to the high school and they don't read well. I don't understand how that happens. But I do think you can still obviously use the same things they use in adult literacy programs to get kids to read who are in high school. Use those same strategies, and let's get them to a point where they can compete for real. Let's not say, well, we're not going to make you do that. Oh, you're anxious, we won't make you do public speaking. That's not the right way to go. If you're anxious, I think you should do more public speaking. Maybe we ease you into it with a smaller audience, or maybe I do it with you one-on-one a couple times till you feel better. But I'm not accommodating you from being a real adult when you graduate. I'd feel like I let kids down if I did that.
All right. Thank you so much for this conversation. Is there any closing statements you want to have?
No, I think just, I always just like to close by saying, I guess I'll close by saying teachers teachers are identified often, especially in social media, and it's because they see the X video, they see the X videos or they see the TikTok videos and like, what are these teachers doing? And it's always some crazy outlier teacher. I think teachers are really some of the greatest people you'd ever want to meet. I really do. I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it. But I think we've got a systemic problem in New Hampshire schools that if we don't address it, we're all going to be real sorry about it. And we've got to start being honest about it.
Christian Cheetham, veteran, teacher, thank you for your service at both those things, because they're both tremendous things that I could do, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about this.
Thank you so much.
All right, NewEnglandTake.com. If you want to check out more from the show, please be sure to follow me on all the socials. This is the next episode of the Cost of Education series. Please do subscribe. I have a separate playlist as more of these episodes get put out, because this is going to be ongoing. It's going to be a while before we're not going to find an answer, but hopefully we can unveil some of the more aspects of the situation at hand. All right, NewEnglandTake.com. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.